A brilliant scientist, a stolen discovery, and a body on the floor of a college research lab. Tonight, the DNA doesn't lie. Good evening, folks. Reporting to you live from Snitch and Stitch. I'm your host, Evan Fernandez, aka known as Snitch, with my co-host,
Rohan Puri, also known as Stitch.
This is a special forensics report, specifically focusing on the murder of Professor Simon Andrews, found dead at Babson College on the evening of April 28, 2025.
So Simon Andrews was, by most accounts, a man on the verge of everything he had ever wanted. Just 3 years into his tenure, he had co-developed a revolutionary antiviral drug called Virugon, which is a single-dose treatment which cures multiple diseases such as HIV, RSV, COVID, the flu, and much more. A potential Nobel Prize, a pharmaceutical empire, and most importantly, a legacy.
But tonight, we're not here to talk about what Simon Andrews built. We're here to talk about what he stole and why that theft almost certainly got him killed.
Investigators collected DNA evidence from 20 locations across the crime scene, from the murder weapon to bloody footprints to the victim's own fingernails, using short tandem repeat analysis or STR profiling, which the forensic scientists were able to build a DNA fingerprint for every suspect and compare it against every piece of evidence recovered in the crime scene.
And what they found points squarely at one person.
Professor Carrie White, co-researcher, colleague, and according to the investigators, the woman who actually made Virugon possible.
Sources close to the investigation confirmed that it was Professor White who identified the original drug compound as a potential antiviral therapy. It was Professor White who ran the safety and efficacy experiments, and it was Professor White who did the paperwork for FDA approval, working, quote, tirelessly day and night.
And you might have guessed it, it was Simon Andrews who deleted her name from the research paper.
In the days before his death, Simon Andrews removed Professor White's name as first author from a paper he was submitting to Nature, one of the most prestigious scientific journals in the world. He also removed her name from a patent application, the decision on which was due the very next morning. A patent that would have made Professor White a co-owner of a drug expected to be prescribed to millions of people worldwide at $10,000 per dose.
Now we're talking about potential earnings in the hundreds of millions of dollars, erased with a few keystrokes.
And this just in, we're getting live reporting from the crime scene with our reporter, Evan LaValle. Go ahead, Evan, you're on.
Here we are at the scene of the crime. To understand why Professor White is the prime suspect, you have to understand the science. STR analysis works like this. Every person inherits 2 copies of each chromosome, one from each parent. At specific locations in the genome, short DNA sequences repeat themselves a variable number of times. The number of repeats is unique to each individual. In this case, our STR marker is 200 base pairs long. If you have 2 copies of that repeat, your DNA produces a band at 400 base pairs on a gel. 3 copies, 600 base pairs, and so on up to 5 copies, or 1,000 base pairs. Every person shows 2 bands, one for each chromosome they inherited. That 2-number combination is their STR profile. The odds of 2 people sharing the same profile by coincidence, 1 in, well, let's just say it's a lot. Investigators ran STR profiles on all of the suspects involved in the case, but the one we're focusing on is Carrie White. They compared each profile against the DNA collected from 20 crime scene locations. Now, which were the critical ones? Let me tell you. Placard 8, the hammer handle, the murder weapon. Placard 6, blood from the broken window as she broke into the lab. And placard 15, DNA recovered under Simon Andrews' own fingernails, suggesting a violent struggle took place before his death. When investigators ran Professor White's STR profile and compared it against the crime scene samples, the results were, as one forensic analysis described it, unambiguous. Her profile matched the DNA recovered from the hammer handle, the blood in the broken glass, and under Simon's fingernails. In any criminal case, investigators look for 3 things: motive, means, and opportunity. Professor White had all 3. We've covered it: the theft of her life's work, her name stripped from a Nobel Prize-worthy paper, the loss of what could have been hundreds of millions of dollars in patent royalties, and the clock was ticking. The patent decision was coming down the very next morning. If she was going to act, That right there was the last chance. Professor White worked in that lab every single day. She knew where every piece of equipment was. She knew Simon's routine. She knew he would be there late, waiting for the protesters outside to disperse before sneaking out. The lab was her territory. The crime occurred in her own lab, so her DNA would naturally be expected on lab equipment like the pipette handle, and that's exactly what the investigators accounted for. But DNA on the murder weapon, DNA in the bloody glass, DNA under the victim's fingernails, that is not something that you'd find in a profile of an innocent person. That is someone who was there for a murder.
Thank you, Ed. Professor Carey White spent months doing work that would have changed medicine forever and watched a colleague prepare to erase her from history entirely. Whether that justifies what happened in that lab on the night of April 28th is not for science to decide. That is for the jury.
But what science can tell us, with 1 in 10 billion degree of certainty, is that Carey White's DNA was on the murder weapon. Her DNA was in the blood, and her DNA was under the victim's fingernails.
Simon Andrews may have thought he could delete her name from a paper. He may have thought he could erase her from a patent.
But he couldn't erase her DNA from the crime scene. In the case of Simon Andrews, it remains open pending trial. We will continue to follow this as the story develops.
From Snitch and Stitch, I'm Stitch.
And I'm Snitch. Stay safe, Boston. Good evening, folks. Tonight we are reporting live from Snitch's Stitch Radio.
From Stitch and Stitch Radio.